has been said that the world is made up of stories, not atoms. The primordial desire to witness to each other's lives carries both personal and social significance. It is important to leave some record of our being here. Joseph Aquila Thompson was born December 9, 1918. A product of the Piedmont, he is the last known African-American fiddle player in North Carolina. As a self-taught musician, he fiddled his way into the hearts of people around the world.
Well, I have walked up to people and tuned up while they were playing and played with them, and when I get through, I would be in the same tune. It come from the ear. I'm gonna tell you about playing music. I used to be out in the field working somewhere, maybe somewhere on the tractor working or doing something. I had thought about a song I wanted to play. Well, that song come to me way out in the field. Well, you see now, it didn't come to me while I had the fiddle in my hand. Then I come on to the house and pick it up and let's go to playing it. But you see, it's got to be in you. It's got to be in you, you know. You got to want to do it. This thing come from my granddaddy started, and then my daddy, and it come from 1700s all the way down to here.
The details take different forms for each of us, but the questions are always the same. Who am I? Why am I here? How should I live? Joe Thompson's music addresses those issues by building community across generations, races, and cultures. Joe was practically born with the fiddle in his hands. He internalized the tunes his fathers and uncles played, and at 5 years old, his mother got him a fiddle from one of her cousins. The fact that it had no strings didn't stop Joe from playing it.
I did what I had saw my brother do. Chestnut, Odell, and Lace, and all them grown big boys. They pulled string out of that screen door. They put on the guitar and the banjos and things so they could play. So I pulled me 2 strings out of that screen door and put it on my fiddle.
That same night, he mesmerized his family by playing hook and line.
You get a line and I'll get a pole. Meet me at the crawdad hole. So that's about the first tune I had ever played. Give me the hook and give me the line. This time on summertime. You get a pole, you get a line. Meet me at the crawdad hole.
It wasn't by happenstance that Joe became a great fiddle player. Strict discipline and raw talent are everywhere evident in the Thompson family. Joe's grandparents, Bob and Kate, had 11 boys and 1 girl. Most of the boys played a string band instrument. They were required to practice until they got it right. Joe's dad, John Arch, did the same for his sons, Joe and Nathaniel.
He taped his hand up so he couldn't play no music. That's what he did to Nate. And he just sat there and claw hammer for 2 weeks. Claw hammer for 2 weeks. But when he took that leg off of that was a rough man. He was ready to go.
The music survives today solely through John Arch's lineage, his son, Joe. Joe and Nathaniel played with their father and uncles, Jake and Walter, from the 1920s to the early 40s.
We had a corn shucking, we'd have a dance that night. Sometime, whoever have a corn shucking, somebody would have a dance. And then in Christmas time, we'd have a dance just about every night in the Christmas.
My daddy played the banjo for the square dances. But I wasn't allowed. My mama didn't believe in square dancing. She didn't believe in dancing, so I didn't dance when I was young. But she would let me go and look. They'd have somebody to call it dancing, and they'd have certain figures, and it would be pretty.
Joe recalls that as a young boy, people pushed the furniture out of the living room and the adjoining room. He and his dad played in the doorway between the two rooms in order to accommodate all the dancers.
We stayed pretty busy down until time to go to war.
When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the music stopped for Joe. But John Arch and his brothers kept the tradition going. Joe left for World War II in 1942. He was assigned to the 61st Engineer Battalion in Tampa, Florida. Overseas, he served as a heavy equipment operator and drove the D-7 Caterpillar to construct pontoon bridges when soldiers had no way of getting across large bodies of water. Joe and his war buddy, Jasper Slade, returned from the war on Thanksgiving Day in 1945. Joe soon discovered, however, that the interest in string band music was waning.
After World War II, with the rise of independent record companies, there are many more opportunities for Black Americans to play emerging popular Black music, particularly rhythm and blues. The independent record companies, the emergence of rhythm and blues, the emergence of Black-oriented radio stations are all factors that lead up to the development of rock and roll and the movement away from that kind of entertainment.
It wouldn't be until the 1970s that Joe would play again, and this time he would play with his first cousin Odell, Walter's son. Together, they would become the new string band duo, replacing their fathers.
I remember knocking on Odell's door, and he was kind of quizzical about what I was doing. He was warm, as he always was, but he was wondering, what is this white guy with a beard, a college student from Greensboro, interested in this old music I played? But he invited me in, and then the next time I came around, which was within a couple weeks, he had gotten a hold of Joe and explained to him what I was doing, and they were quite amenable, and that's actually how I met them, was just out checking around, out doing field work. And that was the fall of 1973.
Kip awoke the sleeping giants, had them shake the dust off of their fiddle and banjo to recreate the Thompson music for a new generation. Joe and Odell played in nearly every state in the country. Their greatest memories were at the American Fiddle Tune Festivals, the Smithsonian Institute, Sydney, Australia, and Carnegie Hall. Before leaving for New York, Joe's banker talked with him about his trip.
Well, you tell me y'all gonna play next? I said, we got to go to New York. He said, New York? I said, yeah. Where at y'all going to New York? I said, Carnegie Hall. And he said, Carnegie Hall? And I said to myself, what's the matter with Carnegie Hall? I ain't know nothing about no Carnegie Hall, but all I know is a hall like any other hall. That's what I was thinking. But I found out different. But then he said, Joe, I don't think you quite know what you running into now. Maybe I better lift you up here a little bit. I said, okay. He said, Carnegie Hall is the big apple. That's what he said. He was making me see something, He said, that's the world's best. I don't care where you go, Carnegie Hall is at the top. And he said, now I want to tell you something now. If you go in Carnegie Hall and play and make a hit, you'll be a celebrity. You'll have to be. You can't be nothing but a celebrity. And I said, well, Odell, whenever you meet a crowd like this, the best thing you can do for this crowd now is to find the hardest thing you got and throw it out there at them. We got this tune we call Black Annie. We worked out of it fine. And so we played this Black Annie. And she played, they clawed at that thing for about almost 2 minutes or longer.
At the height of their revival period, Joe experienced a devastating blow, the loss of Odell.
I said to the Lord that night, I said, why is all this here going on with me? Nobody but me way up here with him. How is this? What is I'm going to have to tell the folks? I said, you have to give me something to tell them. And he made it plain. He made it spoke to me. I didn't hear no voice, but he said, I had to separate you two. That's what come into my mind. And that thing followed me for a while. I had to separate you two because he didn't want me then. He got the one he was after. You wanted.
I was around Joe, you know, for 6 or 7 years, 8 years, whatever, after Dell passed.
That's the boy. Him and so many other folks was willing to help me keep moving on. That's how I kept, like I did. Everybody want to help me play, and everybody was always ready, you know. And they just kept me busy, you know. A lot of time I probably wouldn't have went, but they wanted to go. But so we just got started, and so we never stopped going.
He needed somebody who could follow him and who could do it. And I mean, there are other people who could do it too, but I was one of them who could sit there and brush down and brush up and brush down and have him see his brother Nate sitting there, and they're 5 and 7 years old again, and they're sitting there with their feet off the floor and playing for that dance. And, you know, in addition to the other things that I could do for him that he needed or wanted someone to do as far as dealing with all those details and getting him to places.
By the 1940s, not only had Joe preserved another generation of the Thompsons' music, but both he and the music were crossing racial lines long before the Civil Rights Act. Folklorist Kip Lornell said that 3 factors helped to integrate America: Elvis Presley, Motown, and rural America. String band music was rural America.
Most people had assumed that, you know, black fiddle and banjo playing had remained only in the black community, which was largely true, but there was a surprising amount of interaction on a social and economic level between blacks and whites in Cedar Grove that I had not really anticipated. That was a bit of a surprise to me. And having Joe and Odell and others recount their experiences became pretty clear that that social interaction was an integral part of daily life in that part of North Carolina during the 1930s and 40s. The percentage of blacks and whites in Cedar Grove was not that different. The per capita income of most blacks and whites was fairly similar. So in a lot of ways, these folks were thrown in a rural area where segregation clearly existed, but their daily lives were intertwined because they weren't that much different.
According to Joe, when farmers were getting up around 3 or 4 in the morning to prime tobacco, you could hear nothing but the birds, John Arch and Joe Fletcher, his landlord, going at it on the fiddle and banjo.
It was interesting that the music crossed racial borders, even back in Jim Crow times, around the tobacco barns and other places where blacks and whites would play together. And I believe I've heard Joe say that John Arch and them played for dances sometimes as often as 6 nights a week, 3 nights for whites and 3 nights for blacks.
The quality of the music and the musicians was paramount to race. If you had a good banjo player who happened to be black and some of his neighbors wanted to play music with him, that was not considered such an odd thing, just because of the nature of the dynamics within the community itself.
We had a neighbor in the neighborhood. His name was Gene McCullough. He was a white fella. And he stayed across there about a half a mile, but he was sang this particular song every day, especially if it was a beautiful sunshiny day. He would get out there singing this song, "But I Shall Not Be Moved." And I thought he could sing it so well, I just listened at him every day. Since that time, I often thought about it and tried to sing it once in a while. I shall not be moved like a tree planted by the water. I shall not be moved.
String band musicians like Joe Thompson didn't judge life by color, but by what was right and just. As a worker for 38 years at White's factory, then the largest furniture company in the South, Joe looked out for the boss's young son when many would have seen him fail.
The young man, the gentleman I was working for, of course, he knew that my dad was director of manufacturing. You know, he's the big boss there, so to speak. But, and so they were going to see what they could do with the big boss's son. And he was going to show him up right quick. And he did. I had lumber falling all over my feet coming through that saw. And a young man named Joe Thompson was over beside me, working on another saw. And he saw that happening. And his cousin saw it happening too. And they decided right quick that they were going to do something about that. And I want you to know that that lumber falling on my feet 2 days later, I was in the same rhythm as Joe and his cousin were. They had taught me that quick and had gotten the respect of everybody in that department as a result of that. And I never will forget that because Joe became a lifelong friend.
My daddy, my Uncle Walter, got in bad shape. My daddy was in good shape. My daddy mortgaged his place to hold Uncle Walter. And both of them fell. See, that threw my daddy off track too.
A white farmer got both of their farms, and Joe always felt that he should have allowed them more time to pay the debt.
Even though that incident was something that was burned into his mind and heart, he'd put that behind him, and he realized that that playing his music and sharing his music, that was something that was greater than that. And that told me a lot about him.
From a 300-year-old legacy that reaches back to Africa, the Thompsons have made many contributions to the string band music genre.
Playing the fiddle is a black tradition. The history of violin playing among blacks in the United States was not so much because they came in contact with Europeans, but this was a tradition that was being maintained from Africa.
Initially, that gourd banjo with the short thumb string was an African instrument that was brought here in the minds or hands of the people who first came and were here by the 1740s. And there are no records of white banjo players probably until about the 1830s.
So we have something here that's not just about our day and time, but we have something about the day and time of so many people who came before. So that's what I think is very special about Joe and Odell, the fact they've maintained aspects of so many different cultures, not only black culture, but a shared culture of blacks and whites that was probably important here from a very, very long time ago.
Of the three black banjo players whom I knew the best, Odell was the only one who played with a fiddle player. And so I think the other two were holding on to an older solo tradition, but it happened that the Thompsons had both the solo banjo and the fiddle banjo tradition in their family history.
A lot of people play better than we play. We don't play all that good, but we play tight music nobody else plays. And everybody, while we go, lacks our news and they wants to learn.
Today, people sit and listen to string band music. But in its heyday, square dancing was an equal partner for the music. One didn't exist without the other. The Thompsons could call for a 16-hand set, and the dance could go on for as long as 30 minutes before stopping. The music, the calling, and the dancing made up an emotional climax for everyone who attended.
Before they would play, when you're tuning up, a typical thing to do is, you tune the strings, and as you get closer to the point where you think you're in tune, you start I guess you'd call them, modern musicians call them, running the scales. We were doing that one day, and Joe, I noticed that every time he did it, he played, the third note of the scale, he flattened it. Unlike a lot of the white musicians that I played with, and then of course on a lot of the tunes that they play, that note is flattened, and a lot of people think of that as sort of a characteristic of blues, but in fact it's probably it's older than blues.
A distinguishing characteristic of Joe's music is the unique shuffling of the bow. It's in an egg-beating fashion. Joe has always held on to the string band music tradition when many of his peers turned to blues.
I think it would be wrong just to think of Joe as a fiddler and Odell as a banjo player, because they were both fantastic singers.
Died with the hammer in his hand. Died with the hammer in his hand. Still driving man, don't you see? Still driving man, don't you see?
Their contribution, said a local artist, goes beyond their music. Joe and Odell gave the world a complete experience, not just playing a tune, but added layers, verses, and stories so that you get a sense of the whole community. The music was the medium through which people get a real sense of what it means to be part of a family and a culture and a heritage.
String band music has been the life of the Thompson family all my whole life.
Joe has celebrated his 85th birthday, and though recovering from a stroke, he is still performing. He's a steel-driving man. Joe has given himself and his music to the world, and because of who he is, he will continue to share his music. It has been said that the world is made up of stories, not atoms. The primordial desire to witness to each other's lives carries both personal and social significance. It is important to leave some record of our being here. Joseph Aquila Thompson was born December 9, 1918. A product of the Piedmont, he is the last known African-American fiddle player in North Carolina. As a self-taught musician, he fiddled his way into the hearts of people around the world.
Well, I have walked up to people and tuned up while they were playing and played with them, and when I get through, I would be in the same tune. It come from the ear. I'm gonna tell you about playing music